This is Daf Yomi, or this is the Daf Yomi being recorded for Shmini Atzeres 5785 from Basra Kuf Chafal 121, and we dedicate this Daf for Shmir for the Chayolim, Tzala for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this 8th Tzara. Gemara says, Tanan Hasan, we're halfway down on 121a. Amar B'Shem Gamliel, Lo Hayu Yomim Tovu Yisrael K'Chamisha Atzav. But there were no days as happy for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av, Ukiyom HaKippurim, and like Yom Kippur. Shebahem Benos Yerushalayim Yotzos B'Kli Lavan, She'uan She'ol Vayishas Mishehu. On those days, the daughters of Israel went out with white garments so as not to embarrass somebody who didn't have any clothing, and they would all get married. Now, Bishlam Yom HaKippurim makes sense the day of Yom Kippur, Yom Slichot Mechila, the day of forgiveness and atonement. Why? It makes sense. Yom Shenastim Baruchos Achronos. That's the day where the tablets were given, the second tablets that we were forgiven. Chamisha Basra Ba'av, Mayhan. What was so special about the 15th of Av? Why was this a day of such joy? So the Gemara is now going to give several answers to this question. The first answer is Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Yom Shehutru Shvotim Lavo Zeh Bazeh. That before this, if there was a daughter who inherited the land, she wasn't allowed to marry a man from a different tribe. But now, this day, they made a ruling that she was allowed to marry. My Darush, what was their drasha? Zadavar, Davar Zeh will yet no egel b'dor Zeh. This prohibition from the Torah, this commandment that she can only marry somebody from her tribe, that was only for that generation, not for future generations. Second answer, Rabbi Rachana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Yom Shehutar Shevet Binyamin Lavo B'Kal. This was the day where the tribe of Benjamin was allowed to come into the community. Meaning to say, as it's stated in the book of Judges, in chapter 21, where every man had from the Jewish people taken an oath, and mitzvah saying, and nobody from amongst us will give his daughter to Benjamin for a wife. And this was because Benjamin was in a civil war with the Bnei Israel over the town of Gibeah. This is the story of Pilagish B'Gibeah, that there was a terrible incident there, and Benjamin defended their city, which was Gibeah. So Bnei Israel did a civil war against them, and they also took an oath that they're not going to marry in. So what was their drasha? Now want to marry us. We won't marry, but our children can marry. Our third answer is from Rav Dimi Bar Yosef, Amar Rav Nachman, Yom Shekolabo Meisi Midbar. This was the day where those who died in the wilderness stopped dying. It's the day where there will be no more deaths. Amar Ma'achel Kolov Meisi Midbar. The 15th of Av is the happiest day of the year because that's the day that people stop dying. Why? Because we was taught Achel Kolov Meisi Midbar Dibur Moshe, that Moshe was never able to speak to God until the deaths in the wilderness stopped. Rashbam said it doesn't mean Moshe didn't speak, but it means that he didn't speak like he initially spoke, face to face. But if he needed to speak, like for example, the incident of Korach that was after the spies, then he would speak through an angel or through the Urim and Tumim. Or else, alternatively, Rashbam says he only spoke to him under great need. It says, because it says when all the people stopped dying, and then right after that it states, then God spoke to me. So that was when they stopped dying. And the Midrash tells us that every year they would die. The Jewish people would, on Tisha B'Av, bury themselves in their grave. It was the anniversary of the Marag. And the year that they finally stopped dying, they didn't know. They thought they miscalculated. And so they kept going back in until when it was the 15th of Av and they saw that there was a full moon. That's how they knew that they, in effect, the decree had been averted and they weren't going to die. So there's a whole question Tosfos discusses whether or not that year they actually died or not. And so that's a question. So if they didn't die that year, then maybe in the 40th year they also didn't die. That's a question Tosfos discusses. Ula gives a fourth explanation. Yom Shabita Hosea ben Allah. This is the day that Hosea ben Elah stopped at Pardasos. Shahoshev Yerava Mahadracham. Yerava Menavat had put guards to block people from being Ola Regel. He didn't want them to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And this is being studied on Shmini Atzeres when the pilgrims would be there. And so we see from here that since he removed, it was a happy day. Another day, this was the day that those who were buried, who were killed in Beitar, would be allowed to be buried. What was Beitar? This was during the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Hadrianic persecution. And they weren't even allowed to be buried. So finally, they were allowed to be buried. They made a bracha on that day, the good and the better. The good that they didn't rot, that they're allowed to be buried. So the blessing of the good and the better, that's being allowed to be buried. I mean, it's such a powerful idea. We're making the bracha and being allowed to be buried. You have to have something to be grateful for. Rabbi Yosef Tarmich, another explanation. That's the day that they stopped cutting down the wood for the fire, because they used to use wood on the altar, but the wood had to be very dry. From that day on, it stopped being a day of dry wood because the wood stopped being dry enough. It became moist, and so therefore they stopped doing it. So we see from here that when they complete a mitzvah, they make a big party. That's also a reference to our holiday of Simchas Torah. We complete the Torah, we make a big party. Once the 15th of Av arrived, Tashash Kochel Shochama, the power of the sun broke. And they would not cut down wood for the pyre. And Amar Menashe Karle Yom Tavar Magal. That's the day they broke the axe because they stopped using it to cut down the tree. The Mosif Yosef, from this point on, where the days were shorter, whoever added on hours to their Torah study would get more hours of life. Shema Mosif, whoever did not add on Yosef, such a person would be Yosef. What does it mean, Yosef? Tan Rav Yosef Tikberei Ima. His mother rebellion. Tan Rabbanan Shivu Kap it's Kool and Kool. So the Gemara said to Brisa to tell us that those people who had a long life, there were 7 people who had such a long life that if you go through these 7 people, you can go through the whole world. Misushalach Ra Adam, Misushalach saw Adam, Shem Ra Misushalach, Shem saw Misushalach, Yaakov Ra is Shem, Yaakov saw Shem, Amram Ra is Yaakov, and then Achyan Shiloni Ra is Amram. Eliyahu Ra is Achyan Shiloni, and that's how you go all the way to Eliyahu, and Eliyahu Adayin Kayam. And Eliyahu saw Achyan Shiloni, and Eliyahu is still alive. Achyan Shiloni Ra is Amram, did Achyan Shiloni see Amram? We just say all the people in the generation who left Egypt died in the wilderness. So how do we explain this? So the Gemara says, no, the tribe of Levi didn't have this decree, they didn't die. As it states, but in the wilderness, everybody who was from 20 to 60 would die. But that only means Mishipkudav mi ben Esrim. But Levi was not counted from 20. This only refers to those who were counted from 20 to 60. Levi was counted from 30 onward. From all the other tribes, there was nobody who survived. What about the fact that Yair, Ben Menashe, and Machar Ben Menashe were born in the time of Jacob? They were born in the time of Jacob. They only died after they went into the land. As it says, the men of Ai died like 36 men. Vitanya Shisha Mamish, to be Rabbi Yehuda, it says actually 36 men. Was it actually 36? Doesn't we say it was like 36? Sheshachol Keruba Shel Sanhedrin. This refers to Yair, who was equivalent to the majority of the Sanhedrin. So the Gemara says, Amar. So we see from here that he entered into the land. So why could you say that nobody died, that nobody lived from the other tribes? Amar Rav Achabar Yaakov, oh, so if you were under 20, the decree didn't apply to you, and also if you were over 60, it didn't apply to you. And Achia was over 60. So Gamar Mala and Mala Me'erchen, because we learned that by comparing the word Mala to Erchen, which is the valuation of the person's value. Just like by Erchin, if you're over 60 or under 20, your value is not the same as somebody between 20 to 60. Avkan, also here too, less than 6, more than 60 is like less than 20. So now the Gemara asks another question, which will pick this up, God willing, in the Daf Yomi. This is the Daf Yomi for Simchas Torah itself. How is the land of Israel divided? Eretz Yisrael Shvatim Yifog Udamo Karka. Were all the tribes given an equal portion, or was it divided up on the basis of each person? So that we're going to discuss on Simchas Torah. That will be the Daf Yomi for Simchas Torah.